Hello, and welcome back to another episode of 360 Sports. Today, we're talking about the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the UFC. My name is Luke Stefanisco. I'm joined alongside Bannon Crowley, Oliver Turner, and Alec Brown. Let's dive in. Starting off with the biggest news out of UFC 322, Islam Makhachev became the 11th fighter in UFC history to become a double champion, winning the welterweight title belt from Jack Della Maddalena. Who's next for Islam at welterweight, and what do you guys think of this fight?
Yeah, so it seems like he wants to fight Kamaru Usman next. Is that the best fight? Probably not. But hypothetically, if we see that, we have a lot of good matchups besides that. Other guys that he could fight, we got guys like Carlos Prates, Michael Morales. Is Shavkat back? I mean, JDM, Sean Brady, Bilal still in there. There's a lot of good guys right now. And I think Usman will probably be the next fight, unfortunately, because there's so many great guys. But I do hope that Usman does get one more good fight.
Absolutely. I think the UFC might push to do the super fight with Ilia Topuria. I don't believe a matchup at 170 really favors Ilia Topuria, but that would be one of, if not the biggest fights of all time. And as a lot of fighters have said, would probably be the most skillful fight of all time. So I think if they push towards that, you have a lot of other interesting matchups at 170, like Morales Prates, which someone could potentially lose their life if that fight happened. But I don't know. Welterweight is probably the most interesting division right now.
I feel like there's so many options. I can't remember the last time we had really 5-6 contenders that could quite literally fight for the title. I mean, we think about Kamaru Usman. He's probably one away. Bilal's probably one away. Ian Gary's one away too if he wins this fight against Bilal Muhammad. Michael Morales, you could honestly say, could just qualify just because of how strong his wins were against Neil Magny, against Gilbert Burns, and against Leon Edwards, which just happened. I mean, all in one round within a few minutes. How do you deny that guy? Also 26 years old, I think. So if there's really one clear contender, I think right now it is Morales, but it could be Ian Gary or Bilal, depending on how this weekend goes.
I remember when people said this division was so stagnant that there was no real contenders when it was Leon with the belt or Usman with the belt. Now it's kind of overflowing, and you're like, I don't know who should be the next up in this division, which is, again, is probably a good problem for the UFC to have, because you don't want to have that division where it's the gatekeeper at the top who's never losing. Everyone says this guy's the one that can beat him, like Alexandre Pantoja down in flyweight right now, which every other fighter, man, Kaya Sakura is really, really good coming over from Japan. He could beat Pantoja, gets subbed in the second round. It's a good problem for the UFC to have. I just love the prospects in this division. I think we talked about it enough. Morales is super, super young, and at the level he is, I think that'd be an entertaining fight against Islam. I do think the most realistic fight is Usman or the winner of Bilal Muhammad and Ian Gary. I think both those guys kind of deserving. Now, would Bilal want to fight Islam? That's another question, because they have that friendship that was well discussed before Islam moved it to welterweight. But yeah, I think that's probably the easiest move for the UFC to make.
There's just so many young up-and-comers in this division. I mean, like you said, a few years ago, this was potentially the worst division. Now I think it was unequivocally the best division. Like, it's overtaken 155, which is historically the best division, but there's so many guys. You could make an entire card of just welterweights.
I don't think there's any bad matchups we can see. Like, hypothetically, I put some fights here together. If he fights Usman, we could have Ian Gary versus Morales as a number one contender fight. We could have Prates versus Shavkat. We can have JDM versus Brady, Bilal versus Buckley. There's so many good guys right now that I don't think they can mess this division up. And that's something that matchmaking hasn't been great the past year or so. There have been some good fights, but I think this is something that could definitely help bring the UFC back.
100%.
Well, moving forward, we're going to go to a division that's going to be caught up in some stagnation, unfortunately, due to the nature of the beats. Valentina Shevchenko defeated Zhang Weili to retain her flyweight title via unanimous decision. Does this cement Shevchenko as one of the GOATs of women's MMA, and where does Zhang Weili go from here?
I think it absolutely does. I mean, who can beat Valentina Shevchenko? She absolutely dominated the number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in women's MMA. Weili was clearly outmatched, and I don't see anyone beating Valentina Shevchenko. It's just, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I think I would still have Amanda Nunes number 1 all time, especially if she comes back and beats Kayla Harrison. I mean, that'd be very impressive. But Valentina Shevchenko definitely is up there as one of the top 3 ever. And I think if Weili came in and won this belt, then it would be a very different conversation. But Shevchenko showed that there's definitely levels to this.
Well, I mean, if she's not 1, then she's obviously 2, just because it's either her or Nunes. Those are the clear top 2. But also, I mean, you have to give her so much credit. She's been super active. She's gone through almost everyone. After her Little Strange trilogy with Lexa Grasso, she's been on a roll still. Fiarat, UD, very easy. Same thing with this Weili fight. Looked almost somehow easier than Fiarat, which I don't think any of us expected at all. And then, unfortunately for Weili, but she'll be fine. She'll get to go back down and just cruise through the good old flyweight division again. I think Mackenzie Dern's up next, obviously, because she's the champion. I think she runs through Dern in a heartbeat.
100%.
And then Shevchenko, she'll go on to fight Natalia Silva. She's had a good win over Alexa Grasso not too long ago. So at least divisions will both move. But if she gets one more title defense, honestly, you could probably put her in front of Nunes.
I hate hindsight in the UFC, especially in a situation like this where you're going to look back and say, nothing really changed. Whaley's going to go back down to her division, win the title again. Mackenzie Dern's going to be back to being a number one contender. Shevchenko's going to continue to win. I would like the Natalia Silva fight. I think that's going to be very, very entertaining. But again, we just saw Zhang Weili, one of the best women's MMA fighters ever, probably in that conversation, top 5, get dominated by Shevchenko. I think, is Natalia Silva really that much better than Zhang Weili?
Probably not.
No.
Probably not. So I think it's the same thing you're going to see. She's probably going to lose that fight, and it's going to be Shevchenko until she either decides to retire or someone, maybe flukes a win. I mean, Alexa Grasso, that fight against her when she took the belt off Shevchenko, that might be the biggest fluke in MMA history.
Yeah.
I think it's up there.
Can Kayla Harrison cut the weight is the real question.
Yeah.
I think
Already looks like a ghost almost at
Yeah.
135, but you never know.
I'm impressed she continues to make weight. I mean, the fact that what did she fight at in Bellator?
155.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's insane. I mean, is there a conversation for the UFC to add a 55 division for women?
I mean, they tried to add a 45. It just wasn't.
There just wasn't contenders
Yeah, there wasn't
against
enough.
Nunes. No one could beat her.
That's
So,
fair. I mean, that's the case. But
Yeah.
I think women's MMA is kind of in an odd spot right now.
Yeah.
I hope Kayla Harrison can kind of be the change for women's MMA. I know a friend of the 360 Sports program, Miles Bartley, would be very excited that we're discussing women's MMA on this program. But we'll move on now to kind of the other side of UFC 322. There was 4 knockouts in a row leading into the main card, including that man right there, Bo Nickel, knocking out Rodolfo Vieira. You also had Carlos Prates knocking out Leon Edwards, Michael Morales knocking out Sean Brady, and Benoit Saint-Denis knocking out Beneil Dariush. Which one of those knockouts was your favorite? Which one means the most to the UFC?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I had Michael Morales. I mean, he's fantastic. I'm glad he was kind of stuck in that fight night card for a long time, the past year and a half. Finally got the opportunity against one of the best in the division, went out there and proved that he is just an athletic freak. And I think he could go and contend for a championship soon. And that was just a fantastic knockout from him.
Yeah, I mean, Morales just looked so much bigger than Sean Brady. Like the size was a clear issue. I actually have Carlos Prates as my personal favorite knockout. I mean, he has to start becoming one of the definitions of a knockout artist in the UFC. He might be welterweight Alex Pereira. I mean, 5 wins all by knockout. Absolutely ran through Leon Edwards. Had the spinning elbow a few months ago. He knocks everybody out. So that was my personal favorite, and he was just such a clean knockout. One punch. It was just something special for the young guy.
I mean, not that I didn't love seeing the good Nittany line right there and Bo Nickel get the head kick knockout over Rodolfo Vieira, but I got to agree to your point. Carlos Prates, I think also the way you knock someone out is a huge margin of that too. And who does that to Leon Edwards? A flush jab down the middle and takes his lights out. Mind you, this guy has gone to wars with, I know I'm going to start with his name, but Nate Diaz, Kamaru Usman, Bilal Muhammad, didn't knock him out either. Colby Covington, when he kind of had something in the tank. But he's been able to get through all these guys in the division before him. Even Tyron Woodley was known as one of the best knockout artists in the sport when he was still the reigning champion. So it's not like he wasn't going against bad guys or anything. It's just Carlos Prates is that good at knocking people out. Did the same thing to Jeff Neal a few months ago, too. His activity is crazy.
Yeah, Carlos Prates is one of the cooler fighters in the sport. I think people have really come around to him. I know the rest of the fighting nerds have had their down times, and recently he hasn't. He had his downtime in the loss to Ian Gary. Since then, it's been skyrocketing back up to the moon. I will talk about Bo Nickel because, as a big fan of Penn State wrestling, the improvement was really evident in his last fight with Rodolfo Vieira. I was really happy to see him stand on the feet and strike, but also in that first round, he used his wrestling a little bit against the BJJ guy. The last fight against Paul Craig, he refused to use his wrestling at all, and that's why he got booed by the Madison Square Garden crowd. He gave him something to cheer about this time, minus the post-fight speech. Don't like the way that was. Kind of knocked off everything cool he did in the fight, but still, I think there's a lot of potential for Bo Nickel. If he continues to improve his striking, I think there's something there with him because he is a super talented wrestler. I'd argue one of the best American wrestlers in the UFC today in that style of wrestling. How would it match up against, the Russian style of wrestling that we see with guys like Islam Makhachev, Hamzat Chimaev? I don't know. That's also a question for the future if he ever gets there. But I think it's a valid question to ask down the line.
Is he turning himself into a Justin Gaethje, a guy that just doesn't use the wrestling background? I mean, it seems like he is.
I think it's hilarious. Dude, Gaethje must be like allergic to wrestling or something. Like, I think his body is physically allergic to wrestling. I see him like refuse to wrestle in a UFC fight.
Yeah, I think Nickel, he needed this. I mean, a guy, we know how good he is at wrestling. So to get a knockout, that's massive for him going forward as well, and proving that he can be more than just one-dimensional. And that loss to RDR looked really good for a while. Obviously, RDR's last fight kind of takes away a little bit, but still, I think he was just a little ahead of his time for that fight against RDR, but now coming back. Hopefully he fights again before the White House card. If not, it'll be nice to see him fight in at least, 6 months from now. But if he can become more active, he could definitely move his way up. And one of the only hopes for Americans right now, if we're being honest.
Speaking of knockouts, we're going to go around the table and give our favorite knockout of all time, whether it be a crazy highlight or just a very important knockout in UFC history. Oliver, lead us off.
I'm actually going to shout out an American, the pride of Hawaii, Max Holloway, over Justin Gaethje at potentially the biggest card of all time. Last 10 seconds, points down, and just absolutely sleeps one of the most dangerous guys in the business, Justin Gaethje, and has probably one of the coolest moments in his reaction. Also, if you look at some of the other reactions with Joe Rogan and like just the entire crowd, the entire MMA world was just shocked by this knockout. He went in, everyone thought he was outmatched. Justin Gaethje just knocked out Dustin Poirier. They thought he was going to get dominated. Proceeds to dominate the whole fight, point down in the last 10 seconds, and just absolutely sleep Justin Gaethje. Another potential hope for the Americans. I imagine he'll look at a fight Charles Oliveira, which would be pretty conflicting for myself, but it has to be one of the best knockouts of all time.
I mean, people forget that Max Holloway was a surprisingly big underdog in this fight. Justin Gaethje was, I think, around 225, 230-ish.
People just thought Justin Gaethje was so much bigger, and he had just knocked out Dustin Poirier.
And the way he was able to go out there, school him for basically majority of the entire fight, all 5 rounds, then came down to that last second too. And that's how Max Holloway has finished almost every one of his fights, did against Jair in the past too. So it's not like this was just something that came out of nowhere. And then Gaethje, shout out to him for honestly complying with it as well, because at that point, he was already so stunned and wobbled. He had nothing to lose. And honestly, lost everything kind of there.
He had gotten, people forget, he had gotten dominated the whole 5th round too. And then
the broken nose the whole fight too.
Jumping, spinning back kick.
Was that where the why all the rough faces quote came from? That's one of my favorite post-fight quotes from like a fighter who I think lost. I don't know if it was that fight or the fight where he lost.
It was Holloway after losing to either Poirier or Volkanovski.
I swear Gaethje said like why all the long faces in like a post-fight
I
presser.
believe it was Max Holloway.
Well,
Was Gaethje able to speak after that?
Maybe not.
Maybe after a few days.
Maybe
It
after
wasn't 300. All right,
maybe after a round of golf.
Manny, take us away.
So next up, I have, which in my opinion is probably the most important knockout in the UFC's history. I mean, this made the biggest star that we've ever seen in the UFC in Conor McGregor. And the magnitude of this, going up and winning that belt, creating a superstar, a guy that hadn't been knocked out ever in his career up to this point. One loss 10 years before this in Jose Aldo, one of the best we've ever seen. And McGregor comes in, runs through him. A guy that, was a little well unknown at that point, became the biggest star, the biggest superstar in the UFC overnight with this, and solidified himself as one of the best we've ever seen.
I mean, yeah, that is absolutely a pivotal knockout in UFC history, because we all know, Conor McGregor is a name everybody knows, UFC fight fan or not. And that essentially created the biggest star the sport has ever seen.
I mean, yeah, you can't take away from that moment. I think when you think of the UFC, you think of Conor McGregor. And that quite literally made Conor who he was. He was the interim champion before that fight, came in there, knocked out Aldo in 13 seconds after all the press, all the media that went into it, then went on to become the lightweight champion too. So yeah, if you look at a moment of Conor's career where he just kind of figured everything out, it's right there. And Jose Aldo was number 1 pound for pound at the time too. Just insane.
I mean, the man learned Portuguese just to talk trash. So.
Yeah.
That whole tour was awesome. I mean, the fact they did a media tour for a fight like that, that's something I'd expect the UFC to do if they did like Islam and Topuria. If that fight ever does get made, I think they do a press tour for that, because that's how big of a fight.
I think he beat him before the fight. Mentally, you could watch all those back, and he was just in his head. I think there was no way that Conor McGregor was losing that fight. Just, you can look at him throughout anything up to that, and he just absolutely broke down Aldo, and it proved 13 seconds in.
Yeah.
All right, Alec, who's your pick?
All right. Not too far away. We're going to take you back to UFC 308 at the start of the main card. Looking at none other than the one-eyed man himself, Shara Magomedov taking on Armen Petrosian right here. You're going to see it in a few seconds. Going to come around. Double spinning elbow knockout for the win. Has never happened before in the history of the UFC. He came into the UFC as a huge known kickboxer from the Dagestan area, which isn't really something we see a lot. And for Magomedov to come out and do that, not only for Dagestan, but for himself, just to boost his image. You got a Michael Venom Page fight after this as well. Just meant so much for the sport as well. Really kicked off the main card as well for 308 to a huge start as well. And I remember watching this on my buddy's couch at Ithaca College, and just literally my jaw dropped just because of how incredible it was. I mean, how do you do better than that?
I mean, you don't see people do that.
You don't. Who does that to Armen Petrosian, man?
Who does that to Armen Petrosian? Well, no one anymore because he got cut after this fight.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, just an incredible feat. We saw so many spinning elbows after this too. I believe
Carlos Prates.
Yeah, Carlos Prates had one against Jeff Neal.
Diego Lopez
had one
Lerone
against
Murphy.
Lerone Murphy. The
Lerone
same
Murphy
card.
had
Same
one.
card. The
Back-to-back fights, too. I think it was back-to-back fights.
Yeah, no.
I'm fairly certain.
year of the spinning elbow.
Yeah, I mean, it's been crazy. I've also seen him mocked as a potential next opponent for Bo Nickel. I would love to see that, honestly, because I don't think he's that good of a wrestler, but he has the advantage on the feet. Nickel has the advantage on the ground, but obviously not much of a striker.
Yeah.
Would
I'd
Nickel
love to see
even
that.
take it to the ground? That's the real question.
I think he would. When you have an advantage, why not exploit it?
I don't know if they would be able
Justin
to because he
Gaethje.
can't fight in the United States. It
I
seems
forgot
like
about
Nickel
that.
only fights in New York, so that would be tough. But it would be a good matchup to see. But
Or Des Moines.
Yeah, well, Bo Nickel's not a very big fan favorite out there in Iowa. All right, we'll take a trek over to the board myself for my pick. Not necessarily a great knockout, maybe by quality standards, but I got to give it to Leon Edwards knocking out Kamaru Usman to win that very same welterweight title we talked about. This is a crazy knockout, not in the sense of, it was unexpected. Well, it was unexpected in the fifth round of a fight that Leon Edwards was losing, had basically already lost, and he resigned himself to losing, threw a head kick, kind of a prayer, and it landed, gave him the welterweight title. He had a nice run with that title, but if he had not connected on this knockout, I personally don't think Kamaru Usman loses that belt, maybe until he fights Islam Makhachev at UFC 322 this weekend. So it kind of left a huge mark on the UFC just because Leon Edwards was kind of able to connect on a Hail Mary prayer head kick and end this fight. If he didn't, I think that shapes an entire division completely down a different path and a different timeline. But he hit on this head kick and became welterweight champion, and the rest is history.
I mean, yeah, you do have to think of what would have happened after that fight, because when you think about it, Bilal Muhammad, how long did he take to get his title shot? They let Colby get another shot at it before Bilal. So maybe we see Usman Covington 3 before we even see Bilal get a chance at it, which I think would just be absurd to think about now. And also John Anik just saying that's not the cloth what he's cut from, and then Leon gets the head kick KO. That might be one of the best moments like commentating ever.
Probably potentially the best call in the history of the sport.
yeah,
Headshot dead, as Leon dubbed it himself.
And he got headshot deaded against
Carlos Prates,
last
it
weekend.
all came back to him.
The sport's unforgiving, man.
It is.
It is. It
most
is a
certainly.
brutal sport. Let's make it a little bit more fun here as we move on to our next segment and build our dream main event UFC card. You get 4 fights. Pick your 4 fights that you got to be realistic or you can have some fun with it. We'll start with Oliver.
I actually did 5. It's semi-realistic. So open the card, a fight I think everyone wants to see, especially potentially the White House looming. Sean O'Malley versus Corey Sandhagen. I think that would be an incredibly fun fight. Would not touch the ground, which many MMA fans enjoy, and they would just be incredibly fun. Then another fight that has been teased a little bit: Diego Lopez versus Yair Rodriguez. A little bit of background there. We know they don't exactly like each other. Another fight that'd be just a really fun striking matchup. And then a fight that I talked about earlier: Carlos Prates versus Michael Morales as a potential title eliminator. And then my co-main is another fight that's been rumored a little bit. 2 personal favorites of mine: Charles Oliveira versus Max Holloway for the BMF. A little history there, and both just sitting at the top of lightweight, kind of waiting for their title shot. And then another fight that would probably be the biggest fight of all times: John Jones versus Alex Pereira, if John Jones decides to come back and fight at the White House. That would feed families.
Yeah, that would be a great card. I had 4 here. Mine was not as realistic, but still guys that are in the UFC right now. I had JDM versus Morales. I think boxing-wise, 2 of the best strikers in that division right now. After that, I had Islam versus Ilya. I want to see this at 155. I think 170, it's not as close. I think Islam has a clear advantage there. 155, I think it's a real toss-up there. Next up, I have Merab versus Pantoja, which I think if Pantoja wins, I mean, we talked about how it's really not competitive for him at 125. So Merab versus Pantoja, I think, would be a fantastic fight. And then I have Jones versus Pereira. I would want to see that at 205. I know Jones is older now, but in a hypothetical matchup, that at 205, I think would be fantastic to see.
I think that at like a catch weight 230 would probably be perfect. Because I know both of them has talked about how they don't want to cut as much weight anymore. Especially they're both on the other side of 35.
Yeah.
Let's make a little agreement to the side. I'll go next. So for my first fight, I'm thinking that this is going to happen July 4th. This is what I'd want to see at the UFC White House card. I think you got to start off something big. You got to go O'Malley Sandhagen. Big strikers in the division. Both haven't matched up in a while. Both coming off a loss to Merab Dvalishvili. So I feel like those are the guys you really want to see. And I feel like that's a fight that the division could have had for the past 3-4 years. I don't know why we haven't seen it. So that's what I want to see. And then in my hypothetical two, Gary Bilal next weekend. Gary wins by a very sloppy, boring decision. The UFC is not satisfied. They need to see one more fight. It's Morales Gary. I mean, that would be the clear-cut number one contender fight. It's got to go 25 minutes. I want to see what happens. You have one guy who's a knockout killer, kind of like Carlos Prates was, and then Ian Gary's still the same guy, and he's really been able to take down some of these big names like MVPs. That's still his only loss in the UFC was to Ian Gary, which shows you how good he is. Then for the co-main, you got to go big. I think Tom Aspinall will eventually beat Cyril Gane. And Tom's going to need a new opponent. They're going to make a call all the way to the PFL. Francis Ngannou would come back, try to get his belt back after being 5 years away, or 6 years by that point, away from the UFC. That'd be the co-main event. Tom Aspinall, Francis Ngannou. That might be the most scary fight ever. I couldn't think of something I'd be more hyped for to see at the heavyweight division. Both guys, probably the best pop of all time. So I think that's going to be the co-main. And then for the main event, unfortunately, you guys touched on a bunch, but it has to be Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. They're the number one and the number two pound for pound in the world. I don't care if you have Ilia first or Makhachev first. They're both deserving the number one spot. So we have to know who is the number one fighter in the world.
Ngannou Aspinall, someone's probably going to die in that fight.
Yeah, I mean, that is like a dream fight, I think, for most UFC fans.
It would never happen, but man.
He burned his bridge, which sucks. I hate that some guys burn their bridges with the UFC. Yeah. And like, again, like we touched on before the show, Muhammad Mokaev probably not coming back, even though I think he is deserving of it. Francis Ngannou is a guy like that. Tito Ortiz, I know he's not fighting age, but he's not the biggest friend of Dana White.
Neither is John Jones anymore, but he's looking to maybe unburn that bridge.
Well, he's going to have to do a lot to unburn that bridge. I'm moving on to my card. I guess you could say two troublemakers to open up the main card, but this is a fight I'd love to see. They fought for the title a year or so ago, I believe 2023. Sean Strickland and Israel Adesanya get that second match. The first one was fun. Strickland took the first round and kind of rode that one to win the rest of the fight. I think at this point in their careers, it makes sense because they both need a fight or two to get back to a title shot. Strickland probably 2, Adesanya probably 2 or 3. I think it's a good start and get them on a big-time pay-per-view card because there's still a big fan base with both of those guys. Then I also have Yuri Prochazka, Magomed Ankalaev. I thought that fight stylistically would have been awesome had Ankalaev beaten Alex Pereira for the light heavyweight title. He didn't, but I think it makes sense now in the fact that if Ankalaev wants a rematch, he's got to go through a guy that Pereira has beaten twice and prove himself as an actual contender once again. I think that's the fight to do it. The co-main, we talked about it a little bit earlier, Amanda Nunes and Kayla Harrison. That's probably one of the best women's fights you're going to see of all time. I think it redeems the Shevchenko-Weili fight because of how good that fight would actually be. And I would just love to see that. If it's not on the White House, if it's on the White House, either or, I think it still works. And then my main, I want to see Tom Aspinall and Cyril Gane. That fight came out so hot in the first round. Gane looked really, really good. Aspinall was having fun. You could tell he was excited to actually be in a fight that wasn't going to end in the first round for the first time in how long for him. I think give him another chance with a guy he knows is going to bring it. That's going to be some fireworks in the octagon. And if, again, it's at the White House, fireworks on the front, on the West Lawn, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, I just love your fight of Prochazka, Magomed Ankalaev. I'm shocked that, honestly, there hasn't been a lot of talks right now what's going on at 205 because Olberg's coming off a huge win. Yuri's coming off a huge win against Kolo Roundtree. Obviously, Alex Pereira's coming off a huge win. But there's kind of that gray area where you don't really know if he's going to move up to heavyweight or try to defend again. So I think they really start needing matchmaking that division. And I think it honestly does start with Yuri Prochazka versus Magomed Ankalaev. I think it's probably the best, fun, stylistical match you can make just because when you think about who Magomed's faced and how, honestly, sometimes his fights get pretty boring, Yuri is that guy. with the jiu-jitsu background, with the wrestling background, because we've seen it in a bunch of his fights, that could make Magomed look kind of entertaining.
Yeah. I think it's impossible to have an unentertaining fight with Yuri Prohaska style. And with the talks of Alex potentially moving up, we could see that for maybe a vacant title in the coming months.
With that being said, let's move on to our final segment and talk about UFC Qatar. A couple pretty big fights on this card. We'll start off with the main event, Dan Hooker and Arman Saruki in a big-time fight at lightweight. You can see one of these guys fighting Ilia Topuria. They pick up this win. We'll start with Oliver for your pick.
As much as I want to ride with a personal favorite of mine, Dan Hooker, he could potentially catch Arman. I don't see him winning. The wrestling is going to be a problem. Arman has faced the higher level fighter in Charles Oliveira. Hooker's best fight is Dustin Poirier, which was an absolute war. I think a personal favorite fight of most UFC fans, but he still lost. He got ran through by Islam Makhachev. He's coming off a lot of split decision wins. Just hasn't really shown like an ability to beat a high level guy like Arman. So as much as I want my guy Dan Hooker to win, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I think Armin's going to show that there's levels to this, especially in this division. When they were supposed to fight, I honestly think he's going to be the only guys that could give Islam a chance. Like, I think Armin really is that good, and I think he's going to show it this weekend. But now, obviously another boogeyman in Ilya at the top of the division. But I think that is one of the best, highest skilled fights you can make. If Armin wins this, him against Ilya, I think would be fantastic.
I think the one advantage that Hooker might have is just he's had a little bit more activity in the UFC recently, even though it hasn't been that much either. But Armin's last fight was UFC 300 against Charles Oliveira.
Almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah, since then, we have not seen him. I mean, obviously, he's supposed to fight in January against Makhachev. We know how that ended. Became Money Moicano's time to step up and be great. But I just feel like you can say the inactivity could be there, but also you just know how good he is. You've seen the wrestling. You've seen him dominate Oliveira for a little bit. You see him get that knockout against Dariush. You see him have a close fight with Gamrot. You see him have a close fight with Makhachev years ago. Mm-hmm. So I feel like when you see all that, it's just so hard to pick someone like Hooker that's had some wishy-washy fights with guys that just aren't as good, like Jalen Turner, unfortunately like Gamrot, like Arnold Allen when he moved down to 145 for some reason. But yeah, just the levels don't stack up, unfortunately.
I think Armin's inactivity is the only reason this fight's even happening. Like the fact that he hasn't fought in 2 years is why the UFC thinks he needs another win to fight for the title. Again, he was supposed to, but you just need to see more out of the guy.
As much as I like Dan Hooker, I'm rolling Armin here. We'll move on to the co-main event, Bilal Muhammad and Ian Gary. Another big fight at welterweight, a possible title eliminator. Go pretty quickly here, guys, and give your picks.
I think Ian Gary is going to show how good he is. I mean, we saw he beat Carlos Prates, and Carlos Prates obviously went out and did what he did. So I think I'm taking Ian Gary all the way.
Yeah, I have Ian Gary. With the performances we just saw this past weekend, he needs a big win. He needs to get a finish to get his name back in there.
I feel like Ian Gary might get it done. I think it's going to be one of those long, drawn-out 25-minute fights. I think it's going to be very similar to how JDM, Bilal Muhammad went back in May, and I'm super excited to see it. Both guys are super strong, technical, don't really have that finishing potential, but it's going to be a really fun fight.
Yeah, I'm going to roll with Ian Gary on this one. I like his stuff. I think he's been criminally underrated by a lot of MMA fans. I think that's going to be his, coming out party on Saturday. I think he's going to have a pretty big win over Bilal Muhammad. With that being said, that's all the time we have here today on 360 Sports, talking about the UFC. I had a great time with Banning, Oliver, and Alec. I'm Luke Stefanisco. Thanks for tuning in, and have a good one, folks.